I've heard that companies will put a job on, take it off, put it on, take it off. I don't know. LinkedIn's always been great for me. One of the best approaches is network. If you're a coordinator and you know CRAs, or if you can get someone to recommend you, networking is critical in this industry for so many things. If you want to have writing opportunities, if you want to speak at conferences, if you want to find out about job prospects. That's my very diverse answer.
TMF Daily enthusiasts, today we're talking about how a clinical research career can change your life. Well, the guest I have today is going to give us great insight on how nurses can transition from study coordinator to eventually management. Elizabeth Weekes-Rowe has authored several books and is a well-known public speaker. Elizabeth, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It is a pleasure, and I'm glad we finally could coordinate this.
Me too.
It's been on my radar, something of great importance. And in fact, when you first announced you were doing a podcast, I thought it's about time. So pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. And I feel spoiled because we're kind of friends outside of this. So it's like perfect intersection.
It's a perfect way for us to just catch up. So can you just tell us a little bit about, you started off as a nurse, right? And then you transitioned to a study coordinator. Like that was your first job in clinical research.
It was.
So tell us like how that happened.
Kind of a funny story. I was looking for a change. I'm a licensed vocational nurse. I had worked in different areas, clinics, hospitals, and I was looking for a new therapeutic area, a new challenge. Every couple of years, that's what I like to do. That's why clinical research was the perfect answer to my short attention span. I don't know. I walked into a clinic in San Diego, large medical institution where a friend of mine worked. And it's so funny because my joke and I say I walked in a nurse and I walked out as a study coordinator, not knowing exactly what that meant. And that's a little bit of, what do they call it, poetic license. I walked out almost having a job as a coordinator. I was offered it the next day. I knew I had the job, but I didn't have an offer letter.
Were you interviewing?
Yeah, I walked in, and that's what I was telling you. It was really funny.
Sorry.
So I walked in, and no, that's okay. That's okay. The recruiter behind the counter, when I walked in and applied for a job, said to me, "Do you know anything about clinical research?" And I thought, I have no idea, but I'm not going to tell her how ignorant I am. I said, "No, not really." And in my mind, I'm thinking Albert Einstein, wild hair, white coat, bench research, right? No idea. So I've been in the medical field on and off for 10 years, 12 years already. I call it the 7 words that changed everything for me. She said, "Do you want to know about clinical research?" Okay, 8 words. And I said, yes, because always been curious. I know better than anybody that you chase your ambition. And if you don't know everything, education and preparation and training will follow, but you have to have the bravado, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know how that is, being an independent, successful consultant and all the things you've done. So I walked in to apply for a nursing job and I interviewed with the PI, interviewed with the recruiter, and walked out like, I think I have a job and I have no idea what the job is. Because they had told me all this stuff, but you know how it is. Trial by fire assimilation. You hear words and you're like, I know what that is. What is that? What is that? I'm just going to smile and look like I know what I'm talking about. So I had the call the next day that I got the job, and it was a wild ride. I was a coordinator for 9 months, and I became a CRA, and I'll tell you about that if you'd like. But that is how I literally, it wasn't intentional. Like most people, maybe 10 years, 12 years plus in clinical research, there was no intentional career path. It's the best thing I've ever done professionally, and it has been one of the best personal things I've done, but had no idea what it was when I got into it.
So how did you learn the investigator site file?
Well, it was the regulatory binder, and I'll be honest with you, the regulatory binder was a big part of how I learned my job, and I'll tell you why. So I was learning clinical research, and I was learning my role as a coordinator. And it was the most stressful time, one of the most stressful times of my life. The training was very piecemeal, wasn't organized. And I've talked about this before. Like now we have these very structured, methodical training programs for coordinators, for CRAs, for what have you. whether they're institutional, sponsored, independent, people are given a certain pace and a curriculum and it's organized. Mine was like, throw things at the wall and see what sticks, free for all. And I'm not kidding you. Like, I would learn as I go. I'd read a protocol. My PI was wonderful. She arranged for a monitor to be there with me my second day. I literally had a monitoring visit my second day on the job. And everyone, all the nurses in the clinic were like, oh, in arms, like, it's so hard. That's so mean. Well, no, actually, my PI was brilliant because who better to train me?
Mm-hmm.
There was no other coordinator to train me because I had walked into a situation where they didn't tell me that the coordinator, my predecessor, had left 6 weeks prior. So I walked into a room with regulatory binders, case report forms. It looked like, the copy machine had broken and there had been an explosion in the room. And I'm not exaggerating, and I had no idea what any of it was, because I think if I knew what I didn't know, I would have walked out. But anyway, the monitor trained me. And speaking to your question, genuinely, truly, there were 2 regulatory binders on my desk because, they were like this high. My desk was this high with notebooks. I just started opening, and the monitor said to me, he said, read through this. It will teach you better, almost better than I could. That's how I learned what a protocol approval letter was, an IRB approval for a protocol. That's how I learned how to create and work within a sponsor's informed consent template. What I had no idea what I was doing. I modeled what I did off of documents in the investigator site file, the reg binder. I wrote my first memo to file as a coordinator for a deviation based on what someone else had written, another coordinator ago. And so it was a critical training tool for me. So very appreciative of that.
This seems to be like a common response with study coordinators, that they learn from the CRAs when they've had no experience. When I ask other people on the podcast, like, how'd you learn the investigator site file, the regulatory binder? They say, it was the CRA. Or I was looking, like you said, the reg binder and comparing what had already been done. And that's so important, I think, to go back, compare, depending on if they did it right? And that's
Right.
hard too,
Right.
as a new hire, to look and, and think, should I do this? They wrote it this way. Is it the right way?
Yes. And I think that it was its own curriculum for me, to be honest with you. And I feel like the TMF has served as kind of the TMF investigator site file. I've seen it grow over the 24 years I've been in clinical research, truly, paper to electronic. I've seen it gain. I mean, it's always been important, but I think in the last 10 years, that to me, and you're so much more an expert than me, it's not even funny. I think the TMF really started getting the attention, recognition, criticality with audits, inspections. And I've seen it morph over the years to the pivotal arrow in the quiver of the clinical trial process. I've seen it grow from paper to electronic to what we have now, and the efficiencies. It's just incredible. And it's so wonderful. And I'm so glad it's getting the attention it deserves. And then we have specialists like you who are experts. So had a great impact on me.
So you were a study coordinator, did you say, for 9 months?
For 9 months.
And then you became a CRA.
I did, which probably I should have been a study coordinator longer, but I was ambitious. I was helped. I was lucky. I had help. And I think it was never easy to do that transition, but I think back then it was easier than it is now.
I think that still even holds true today. Like, if you have the ambition and you show that you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to learn and that you're trainable, you can do it. It's not impossible.
Absolutely. It's not impossible. You're absolutely right. And I think that I was new. I had medical background and training, which helped immensely. Before I became an LVN, I had worked, I'd worked as a lab assistant, a lab technician. I had drawn blood, plated specimens. I worked as a cardiac tech, an ECG, stress testing, medical assistant. So I had so much training.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did my nursing. So I came prepared in that respect, but I had so much to learn. What I lacked in knowledge, I made up for in tenacity. I'll give you an example. Friday night, want to get off, go out, do whatever. I was 28, I think, 29. And my CRA said to me, "Do you have any plans tonight, early evening?" And I looked at her and she was backed up and needed my help. And I said, "I don't now." And I'm not trying to say, look at me, but I will say that I identified early on that I wanted to be a CRA, maybe prematurely, but I still identified early on that's what I wanted to do. I knew that hard work, the willingness to go above and beyond, the willingness to help would not only help the CRA who I liked and respected and my knowledge level, but that connection and networking would serve as the impetus for me to get assistance to go to the next level. There was no premeditation in it because I wanted to help and I wanted to do a good job. She helped me, I helped her. There was a nice connection going. But the happy byproduct was she and her coworker, 3 or 4 months down the line, 5 months down the line, when I mentioned I wanted to become a CRA, were like, "You work hard, you went above and beyond. We'd like to have you on our team." It was certainly not because I was the best coordinator in the world. That is for sure. I developed those skills later, but I was willing to work hard, go above and beyond, go outside the box, and identify what I needed to do in the networking I needed to make to go to the next level.
You became a CRA, a new
I
CRA.
did.
Was there any surprises when you got into that role that you weren't really didn't know or weren't mentally prepared for?
Everything? No, I'm kidding. I was very lucky because, like I said, I worked in various roles and had a lot of training, nursing. I was a flight attendant before I went to nursing school. And so I already had the marriage of medical and travel. So I was very prepared for that. Like being a flight attendant couldn't have been better preparation for the CRA role because, as a flight attendant, you're having to keep track of when your flights leave, get to the airport, coming and going. As a CRA, you have to book your flights, give yourself enough time, map out hotel. So that part was boomed down. And that's a big part. Some CRAs can't make the transition because of the travel and because it's just different, unnerving. I've always been good with moving parts. I think that piece was a big solidifier and brought a comfort level, like an instant comfort level. I think that really understanding adverse events, I was first assigned to a nephrology study and I wasn't given great training on adverse events. Who is, right? And I remember I was looking at adverse events related to dialysis. And the nurse, I said, and she said, "Well, yeah, they're adverse events." And I was like, yeah. And study coordinators, experienced study coordinators and sub-investigators and helped me learn my job better. I'll be perfectly transparent about that. This is, I've been a CRA for 3 months, 4 months, had kind of okay training, but kind of learning as I go. I had really, what I knew was solidified by the wonderful individuals with whom I worked. And she's like, "Yeah, those are adverse events and this and this." And then I looked in the protocol. And when you read something, that's great and you learn it. But when you're working within the parameters of that area, the dots start connecting. And I was like, these are bad side effects or these are bad events or whatever. And then the nurse said, "Oh, yeah, the adverse events." And then I was like, yeah. And then I was like, protocol. Train. Oh, yeah. So, but when you're new and there's so much to learn, it's like it's like a pinball machine and all these things are going bing, bing, bing. But eventually it all comes together. So that probably was the most challenging thing for me. And then when I went to oncology, learning how to do RECIST criteria, calculating tumor progression, that was a whole other topic. I learned.
Right. Is oncology the hardest as a CRA? Is that the hardest therapeutic area?
I think it's one of the more complicated and laborious. I really enjoy oncology. I think that there are several other therapeutic areas that are equally challenging. Infectious disease, because you can get some rare disease or infectious disease that have assessments, parameters, lab values, diagnostics, everything. Oncology has been the most complicated and laborious with a lot of moving parts and elements, but I can't say it's the most. For me, it has been, but I haven't worked in every therapeutic area. But yeah, but once you're trained and you enjoy it, boy, you like other things, but you get so used to doing such a complicated thing that it's like you don't want to you won't lose your skills, but you want to keep your skills fresh.
Right.
So
So let's switch gears a little bit. I know you are a big proponent of attending clinical research conferences and networking. Like, how do you decide which conferences to go to?
I had a pretty easy path early on the conferences for which I wanted to speak and or attend because I became involved with ACRP very early on in my career. I became an ACRP certified CRA 2004, so 4 years into clinical research. I did it pretty early, and I became involved with ACRP, their mission, everything. And the disclaimer here is SOCRA's great, their conference is great, Magi is great. This is what I have done, but there are so many awesome conferences. I'm not only being a proponent for ACRP, but because I was involved with ACRP, CCRA, I was asked to do their item writer, exam writer training. And it was just kind of the natural segue. They had a conference, they had a local chapter meeting. The first time I spoke publicly, because as CRAs, we have to speak and train all the time. But the first time I did it publicly was at a local ACRP chapter meeting. And they were gracious enough to allow me to come. I wasn't asked. I had to seek out these opportunities. And it was the first time I'd attended a meeting and spoken at a meeting. So I spoke and I think I did okay. No one booed me out. I was so nervous that I thought I was going to my stomach was like, and my husband is wonderful. I was crabby at him. He's like, "How are you?" "I'm fine," because I was so nervous. That's my process, right?
Right.
And not being crabby, but just being nervous, like, what? And then from ACRP meeting, I did the conference and then I attended the conference. I've spoken a lot at their conference, but I haven't spoken every single year. I've been an attendee, awesome conference. I spoke at Magi, awesome conference. I spoke at another called Clinical Research, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's a Latin sponsored conference, and that was a great experience. It was virtual because it was during COVID. I've never been to SCRS, Society of Clinical Research Sites. I'd love to go. I hear nothing but great things about their conferences. SOCRA, nothing but good things. So we have Scope. Barnett is involved with Scope. We have so many options. Let me ask you a question, if you don't mind. I've bugged you because you're so good with speaking and being creative. And we talked about this before. When are you going to speak at a conference? You'd be pretty awesome, I think. On behalf of all conferences in clinical research.
I know. I did speak for SOCRA during COVID. It was virtual one time, but it's one of those skills that you're like working on and you're building up to. I'm really an introvert, but you'd never know it. That's why I like to write a lot because I'm usually the girl behind the computer. And the podcast was really just a challenge. And so between Karen Roy and she just said, you'd be really good at it. And I was like, wow, she's the queen of TMF. I better step up to the plate. So then I had to get comfortable being in front of a camera. And so it's baby steps. You got to work your way up there.
I understand that. I really do. I enjoy speaking a lot.
You do.
I always get nervous. It varies. The first in-person conference after COVID that I did, I was so nervous. It was weird. I had been taken back to like first conference jitters. It went great. I'm very fortunate. Well, I prepared, but I was also very fortunate that it turned out. But COVID really put a level of anxiety into speaking live in person that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I was thinking it was just circumstantial. And we had gone from in person to everything remote and we got used to that. Now we're in person again. It's kind of the transitions are like, I enjoy it. And it's always a good experience. You have to kind of make yourself to get through the nerves.
It's one of those.
Even if you're nervous, you just have to go for it.
And keep practicing it. And the more you do it, I think the better you get. But I mean,
yeah, I agree.
You spoke at ACRP, and for someone who's like looking to become a speaker at a conference and say maybe they don't have that confidence, like what do you recommend to someone who's looking to be a speaker for their first time? And how do you build that confidence level?
I would say first, and I'm going to catch cliche phrase, but it's very apropos. There's never the right time. As a 3-month in CRA, I wouldn't have spoken at a conference. They would have probably laughed at me. But there's never the right time. I've worked with people who have been CRAs for 2 years and they say, I'd really like to do this. And it's like, what's stopping you? Well, I'm nervous. Well, this. First thing you have to do is get over your nerves, because if you want to do it, you just have to pull the trigger and go through the process. You can build your confidence by, if you're a CRA, you probably have spoken to small groups. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same dynamic. You might have to walk farther across the stage, maybe speak a little bit louder if you're in a bigger auditorium, but it's the same premise. You know your material. Don't read every slide verbatim. Practice your pronunciations. Time your presentation. Don't over prepare. You can't over prepare. Know the material. Make a flow. If you need notes, note cards, speaker notes, whatever works to help you be comfortable. But like, as for myself, I would be deluding myself if I said, oh, I've gotten through the nerves. I don't think I ever will. That's part of me. I accept it and I just work through it. And I've had pretty good success. Not always, but mostly I've had pretty good success speaking, and I enjoy it. And I think if you are passionate about your topic, everything I speak on almost is what I've created. And you understand, you're a writer as well. And if you create something, you know it, and then it's not difficult to speak on it, especially if something for which you feel passion. Another tip I do is, if I'm going to write on a topic, I'll write an article first, and that will be the framework for my topic of presentation. So if I had something in ACRP clinical researcher, for example, an article, that was the first draft of a presentation I would do later on. And then I also do like polls on LinkedIn sometimes, or I experiment on LinkedIn where I'll write a little bit about a topic I'm thinking about and see how it's well met. That belongs to the algorithm a lot, and you kind of educated me more about that. But, there are various things to do. It's just prepare, practice, timing, and go for it.
Yeah, I think passion's a big one, like you mentioned. Like, as soon as you start talking about it, you can tell when someone's passionate about it. Like the smile, you can see the twinkle in the eye, and like you can feel the excitement in their voice when they're talking about it in their presentation. Like, that's something you can't fake. Like, you either love it or you don't.
And I'm so impressed because you are very natural on camera. Some people are, and some people can achieve it. And for somebody who's an introvert, you do not seem, wow. So good for you.
That's very kind of you to say. So let's talk a little bit about mentorship and training. And you're a big advocate for something like this. And you talk a lot about how training has evolved over the years. Like, can you share with the audience, like, what your training was like when you first started in clinical research and sort of like where it is today?
I do talk about this a lot. You're right. It's something for which I feel great passion. I think that when you have a training environment that is associated with angst and stress, it is way less efficient, positive, productive, optimal than the training environment that is methodical, planned, curriculum organized. I know that seems obvious, but it's not, because, like, for me, my training was piecemeal. I feel like in 2 years, I had gotten a good foundation, but there were certain things later on I found out it was like, oh, I didn't do that. And this is early on. I've been an instructor for various programs, a couple companies who had very methodical planned curriculum that evolved. First, we do foundation, then we do informed consent, then we do observation, then we get out. I think a theory to practice dynamic is really important. And I think now there's a lot more training. You have web-based, you have classroom-based, you have some institutions that literally have an onboarding process from A to Z for their coordinators. You have CRA training academies. CROs, sponsor companies have programs, classroom-based, in-person. There's a curriculum, a chronology of training, and people know that they're going to be trained on this, and then they have to do self-training on this, and then they come back and they have quizzes, and there's a plan. I didn't have a plan when I started. I don't know if you had a plan when you started.
Yeah,
you were kind of just thrown in, right? Haven't you been a people manager too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one big goal of mine.
Congratulations. I have been a CRA manager previously, and the institutions where I did that job really had the CROs I worked for whom I worked really had great training programs. And I've been to a lot of investigational sites that have started that likewise, a formal program, beyond just here SOPs are. I didn't even have SOPs. They actually say, today we're going to read the informed consent SOP, and then tomorrow you're going to watch the PI, and then you're going to watch the head study coordinator, and then we're going to watch you. I've seen the training progress like that, and it's wonderful because I'll tell you what, when I first started, I was so stressed out as a new study coordinator. My mom laughs because I literally, once a month, I would call her and be like, I can't do this, I'm going to quit. No, you're not. Take a breath. And I knew I wasn't going to quit, but I was so stressed out. I think it's come far.
I can definitely relate. Like when you first start out, like you mentioned in the beginning, when you have never been in clinical research before, you might have like a broad knowledge of like what it is. Or maybe you've taken a class in college about intro to clinical research. But when you're actually working in clinical research, it's like nothing that you've learned in college. And so it makes it very challenging when you're learning clinical research and your role, because you're learning two things at the same time, which is very stressful.
Yes.
And not a lot of people talk about that.
I'm curious as to your history as far as like, do you mind if I ask you, what was your first job in clinical research?
That's a loaded one. I think I wore 5 hats.
I'm sure you did, knowing you.
But that's the ambition, because you got to show it. If you want to learn it, they'll teach you. So when I first started, I was a receptionist. So I was the first person that you would see when you walked through the door. I was answering the phones, fielding all the phone calls. I was a clinical trial assistant. And I also worked a help desk for one of the sister companies. And I would field those calls when like the pharmacist would call in and they would have trouble randomizing patients. And so I would have to field those calls to like programmers. And that was sort of how I started. And I had my hands in a little bit of everything at the time. And like you said, once the business picks up and then you show your ambition, then you can focus on one thing. And then went to my boss one day and I said, you know what? I'm so busy. I need to become a full-time clinical trial assistant. Look, we're a tech company. We can automate the phone calls. It's nice to have a human like pick up the phone. I get it, but I want to work in the TMF. Like that's my passion. And then the rest is history.
Good for you. That's awesome. The fact that you were doing all of that, though, the first introduction, that is so important. First impression of the study coordinator to the internal TMF manager, CRA, clinical trials manager on the industry side. You're getting tech exposure. Everything's electronic. That's not a shocker at all. And then about IVRS. I mean, you were a clinical trials assistant, but you were like the clinical trials assistant from soup to nuts. That's awesome. Good for you.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
No, master of a lot.
But, when you work in the TMF, it's like your nose has got to be in the computer. You can't literally drop what you're doing, pick up the phone, pulled in other directions because you're going to make mistakes.
Yes, absolutely.
There's just no room for that. We're not allowed to make mistakes in the TMF.
I think that's something as clinical researchers, that's a double-edged sword, because we shouldn't strive for perfection. We should strive for the greatest quality possible, but secretly we strive for perfection, which is unrealistic. And then when we make mistakes, we are devastated. That's my life. That's like the circle of life for me, right?
Everybody in clinical.
And it's not good, but it is what it is. I'm trying really hard I have high expectations of myself and other people. I'm way kinder to other people than myself when they make mistakes. CRAs who reported to me when I was doing independent consulting. Now I'm back in a senior CRA role with a sponsor. And it's like, we need to be kinder to ourselves, and we need to have a goal of high quality, but Perfectionism is almost never going to come. Sometimes you have a perfect day, or you have a perfect TMF day, or a perfect trip report, no errors, visit report, whatever. High goals are great, with reality balancing it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm off my soapbox.
So I want to talk a little bit about the clinical trial assistant role. Can you just discuss maybe why it would be important for a CTA to read a monitoring visit report? Like, what kind of value would they find in there?
That's a great question. I think that a CTA would be able to not only glean information, but maybe add. And I'll tell you why. I thought about this. So a good monitoring visit report has information that a CTA who's learning or who wants to become a CRA, because that is a very common bridge role, and they might read a good trip report, monitoring visit report, and learn something. Oh, I didn't realize that the PI did that. I didn't realize the CRA was also doing that. Maybe we're both doing the same thing, or they're confirming for me, or they're willing to help. A CTA could learn about an institution, what constitutes confirming equipment, drug accountability. So there's a lot of little things that good trip report could provide, like a mini curriculum to a CTA looking to broaden that role. Thinking about the TMF and a monitoring visit report, the initiation visit report talks about training, sometimes talks about delegation. And I think a CTA could learn additional evolvement of roles. So I didn't realize they were delegated that, or they could be delegated that, because it's not black and white. But I also think the CTA could look at the monitoring visit report and say, hey, that needs to be done as well. Or, hey, that training log should have been mentioned in there. So I really think it's a duality of review that really can help each respective party glean knowledge and learning to better their roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is so much value in those reports. And I don't think people like CRAs, they know to read them. But CTAs, they're so busy filing in the TMF and they're not necessarily looking to read it. They're like, okay, I've got like the confirmation letter, I got the follow-up letter, I got the report, but it's already been signed off. The report's already been approved. Like, that's not one of our things that we really need to check box in terms of everything that needs to be in the report. So we're so busy, like, we got all this, but we never take time, I don't think, to read or find value in it. And I think it was important to mention, like, there is a wealth of knowledge in there.
It's a great question. It's a very unique question outside the box, which is you. So, no, I mean that as a compliment. We talked about that earlier. You think outside the box with the TMF, but you're still adhering to, 21 CFR, ICH, E6R2. What is it? 8? Section 8? I know, I'm a nerd. But you also add a breadth of knowledge and information with the little things, the soft skills, what people don't think about. And that question's one of them. I love it.
So you have a YouTube video where you discuss timely escalations, which is so important. And you give the example of, like, don't let your line manager read your trip report to find out the major issue. So can you maybe give us some examples of, like, when should this get escalated?
I love that question. I've been a CRA who, I'm sure I did that early in my career. I honestly can't remember, but I've more often been the trip report reviewer, whether I was a lead CRA or a CRA line manager, who read something and was like, why am I finding this out now? And I'm not downing anyone. People get very busy. CRAs have to track, document deviations, informed consents, et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of a common sense thing. Unless you are brand new, you will learn over time and experience. If something seems like it should be escalated, escalate it. But like I said in that video, if there's a slight innocuous, a vital sign was taken 5 minutes out of window, there's no problem instant messaging or texting or calling your manager and saying, hey, maybe I'm being a little bit anal retentive, but the protocol says this, XYZ. If I was the line manager, I'd be like, you know what? Thank you for your call. It's not a ring the bell alarm event, but you're going by the protocol. It's a very slight deviation, doesn't bear much of escalation, but you're informing me or informing the clinical trials manager. That's very important. So when in doubt, contact. As you get experience, to me, what should be common sense is like patient was not consented with the updated informed consent, but the procedures were completed. That came as a result of the Amendment 2, I'm just spitballing here, Amendment 2 summary. Or a patient had an SAE that was unreported for a month. Yeah, we have to contact our manager or the clinical trials manager and let them know, hey, I'm going to put this in my report, obviously, but this is kind of a big deal. This is what's going on. This is a protocol deviation. This is my plan of action. Critical thinking is so important. What are our whys? So those kinds of things. Definitely. I've seen it. And I've also been on the receiving end reviewing a report going, egad, why am I just now finding out about this? It was 2 weeks ago. So, and I said, egad. I'm just kidding.
What's the saying? When in doubt, trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, then it should get escalated.
Exactly.
What advice would you give to someone that's trying to enter clinical research and say they don't have experience, but they've got the transferable skills? How do you break in? What advice would you give to someone?
You know, I have several different answers that are all applicable, but the landscape is broader with more people and it's harder. The first line, because I have people asking me a lot, how can I become a CRA? I'm a nurse. I worked, taking vitals or giving an IP infusion on a study, but I haven't been a coordinator or a research nurse directly or whatever. I would say to them, there are many things you can try, but they're highly competitive. I never want to discourage anybody, but I want to be real.
Right.
Try your CRA training programs. A lot of large CROs, even mid-sized CROs and some pharmaceutical companies had training programs, whether it's a formal academy or there's almost like an apprenticeship, but it's paid where you get hired as a new CRA, entry-level CRA, and you are trained. Those are out there. You can go to the website of every mid-sized, small, large CRO. It's a lot of research, but you find the programs. Step 2 of that is they're very, 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 very competitive. So do whatever you can to stand out. Find a recruiter's name, or if you can, reach them on LinkedIn, write a note. I don't know. The other thing you can do is do what you did. Well, I don't know if you did this exact thing and you're not a CRA. However, you started out as a clinical trials assistant. There are different titles to that job, and it's a similar position than 10 years ago to now is what I've seen. It's gotten more tech oriented, but getting a job, whether you're like a remote monitor or an entry level job, not that a CT is, but you know what I mean. Getting an entry level job in a CRO or a sponsor or a device company, what have you, and then work your way up, because it might take longer, but companies would rather keep people and promote them because, as you know, it is so expensive to onboard a new employee. So if you get a job as an entry-level clinical research position at an institution, a CRO sponsor, what have you, you can use that path, like clinical trial assistant to CRA. Many have done it. I even taught in a program where we had clinical trials associates. They would work 60% in that role. 40% would be training to be CRAs. And they were billable, like more than 50% billable. Very unique program. And so those are those opportunities. The caveat to that is you have to take a step backwards to move forwards. It's great if you want to become a CRA. Some people purely want to be a CRA. Well, I shouldn't say purely, but it can be clinical research positions can pay well. As you know, you can have a nice salary, but you might have to take a pay cut and take a step backwards before you move forward. Some people can do that. Some people don't. I would network. Some people think applying for jobs on LinkedIn is great. Some people think it's not. I've heard both. I've heard the gatekeeper software or the AI that reviews CVs is unfair. I've heard that companies will put a job on, take it off, put it on, take it off. I don't know. LinkedIn's always been great for me. That was a long time ago too. One of the best approaches is network. And if you know CRAs, if you're a coordinator and you know CRAs, or if you can get someone to recommend you. Networking is critical in this industry for so many things. If you want to have writing opportunities, if you want to speak at conferences, if you want to find out about job prospects. That's my very diverse answer.
What's the best way to network? Because I know a lot of people network with you. You get a lot of DMs. Like, what DMs sort of like turn you off, or maybe they're coming on too strong, or you can tell when someone effectively is networking and building that relationship? How do you build that?
I think it's really unfortunate and kind of funny when people clearly haven't read my profile. I don't mean read every nook and cranny line by line. That's ridiculous. We're all busy. We do the click. When it comes to emails and instant messages, sometimes we might do the quick glance, but you can't do that when you're looking at someone's LinkedIn profile. I get more people reaching out to me thinking that I'm a recruiter, which I have no idea why. I have no idea why. I never did coaching, job coaching or CRA coaching when I was a independent consultant. I don't have any word on any part of my LinkedIn profile that has recruiter. So people who say to me, can you help me get a job? Can you do this? I get that you're enthusiastic or you really want to get into your dream job, but you have to know the right people to whom to reach out, and that includes reading their profile. And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that's a basic thing. Like, find out who you're reaching out to. I've had people reach out to me who clearly cut and pasted because I got an email from someone that I thought was, or a LinkedIn message from someone that I thought was like pretty nice and detailed. And then 2 days later, I got the same message, but they said, instead of Dear Elizabeth, it said Dear Deborah. So it's like, if you're going to cut and paste, discriminate and be careful. Messages that attract me are confined by time because I travel, and nights and weekend, as you know, I mean, that's when we're kind of looking at stuff. We're watching TV at night. My husband's like, are you on your phone? I'm like, yes, but I'm writing. Sometimes I'm writing people back. I try to write back most people. I honestly do. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes I have people asking me if they can have a phone call during the week. And it's like, I have a full-time job. I can't, I can talk to people, and I have sometimes on the weekend if they want to pick my brain on my way to a doctor's appointment, on my way to the nail salon, whatever. I mean, I've literally done that, and I'm sure you have too, with as busy as you are. I think that if I get a message that is genuine, somebody who obviously has done, looked at my profile, maybe has seen something I've written or whatever, they don't have to. But if someone has a keyword or a tag word that's unique, or if somebody just genuinely says, I've been looking for a job for 6 months or a year. I know you're not a recruiter, but you've done this or you have this information. Can you talk to me? I had one person send me a message that said, I had some questions for a paper I'm writing. Can you answer them? And she sent me literally 15 to 20 questions. And then when I honestly said to her, I can't answer this right away, she was not happy. And it's like, I apologize. Like, sometimes you get very unreasonable requests, and they want things. I don't know. It's like, come on, we got to think about people's workloads and responsibilities. But I try to get back to people. And when I do get back to people, even if it's a week later, I've had more people say, thank you for actually writing me back. Mm-hmm. That's a long answer to a short question, but that's my answer.
I love it. No, it's very true. And you answered it like spot on. It was like everything I was thinking. And that's how it goes.
You and I have talked about that before. Like, I had an experience that was interesting, and I wanted your feedback because it was the strangest message and strangest experience, and not a negative or a positive. It was just weird. And you were like, hey, this is what I would do or what I did. And I was like, hey, light bulb. That was awesome, Nicole. Thank you. That was about a year ago.
Yeah.
How funny.
So I always end my show with 2 questions that I like to ask my guest. And what is the best career advice that you've ever received, and who's it by?
I've gotten so much good career advice. I'll kind of answer 2-pronged. With regard to professional clinical research, CRA, whatever, the best advice I ever received was from a dear lady who was a dear friend. She was my first CRA when I was a study coordinator. She scared me to death. She intimidated me, and she was just kind of quiet, but very serious. But then she turned out to be my mentor for now 24 years and a lovely friend, personal friend, and a lovely, amazing person, Judy Page. She's an independent consultant. She helped me get my first CRA position. So she was one of my first CRAs, helped me learn my job. She helped me get my first CRA position, and she became my second CRA manager. So I was super lucky. I just said to her, what can I ever do to repay you for what you've done for me? And she said, do it for someone else. And I'm not saying that I always help people at all, but I try to be helpful. I really do, because it was done for me, and it's been done for me so many times in my career. And for writing, because you and I are writers and I love to write. And I'm so fortunate that I've been able to do it in clinical research. The first article that I ever submitted was to the ACRP, which was then called the Monitor magazine, and now it became the ACRP Clinical Researcher. And the then editor-in-chief, who's still a friend of mine, was a lovely, lovely lady. All the editors over there are, but this was a long time ago. And she said to me when I submitted my first article, it was very, very, very edited. And I was crestfallen, and I was like,
Right.
my ego, which is gone. When you learn to be a good writer, you learn to check your ego at the door.
Yep.
I was like, this is a very good article. Why was it so edited? And she was very kind, but very like, you need to work with the edits. It'll be a good article. My mother said, get over yourself and do their edits. You're going to get published. And I was like, oh, yeah, another light bulb moment. So the best advice I was given for writing was work with the edits. If you really, really feel important and it changes a critical content piece, and I have great editors, and I do most of the edits I get. I honestly do, because it's like, you're better than me. You know what you're doing, and you're going to make me better.
Yep.
If you have a conflict with someone who's editing what you write and it takes away the message or it messes with the chronology, if it's important, and I tell CRAs this too, with whom I have worked and with whom I'm training or reviewing reports, edits are there for a reason. If it changes something important, do it, but work with the reviewers, work with the editors. Don't just you can't change this. Don't be closed-minded, and don't have an ego. So that's my advice. That's the best advice I received.
All right, Elizabeth, what's your favorite trial master file document and why?
I have two, to be honest with you. The first one is the delegation of authority log, site signature and responsibilities log, whatever you want to call it, because I am very passionate about, and have been passionate about, PI oversight and appropriate delegation. And luckily, I've had very, very good sites with whom I've worked who had delegated so appropriately. The FDA has a really good guidance document. I think it's called 1572. It talks about the 1572 and the delegation, and cleared up some misconceptions. But I love the delegation of authority log, and I love monitoring visit reports, because it's so great to see a detailed, concise monitoring visit report. And you can just, as a CRA taking over a site or new to a company and you're learning, that is such a great roadmap to tell you what was going on. Because like the TMF and like monitoring, audit ready, and someone should be able to pick up after you did and understand the story in front of them. So that's why.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me on the TMF Daily Podcast. I loved our conversation on how clinical research changed your life.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. It's been too long in the making. We finally got our schedules to align, and I would love to do it again if you'll have me.
Yes, we'll do a part 2.
Thank you so much, Nicole.